The afternoon sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the dojo, casting long, calm shadows across the polished wooden floor. The place was silent except for the gentle rhythm of feet moving, robes swishing, and the occasional firm clap from the instructor. This dojo wasn't an ordinary training hall. It belonged to one of the most well-known men in the city. He was a billionaire, but beyond his wealth, he was also a proud Aikido master. People came from all over the country to watch him train, or if they were brave enough, to challenge him. To him, Aikido wasn't just a sport. It was his stage, a way to show his control, balance, and power. He often said that mastering Aikido was like mastering life, but in truth he liked the way people admired him, the way the students bowed extra low when he entered. Respect came easy when you had money and skill. That day the dojo was unusually full. New students had signed up for the beginner's class. Among them was a man who looked out of place. His clothes were old and plain, and his sandals looked worn from long walks. His hands were rough, like someone who worked hard for a living. And beside him stood a little boy around 7 or 8, clutching a small bag that probably held his father's uniform. The billionaire noticed them from across the room. He raised an eyebrow. Most people who came to his dojo wore expensive sports gear and drove luxury cars. But this man, this single father, seemed to have none of that. He stood quietly, keeping his son close, waiting for someone to tell him where to go. The instructor on duty, a young man eager to impress, walked over to them. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, glancing at the worn shoes. The father smiled gently and nodded. "Yes, sir. I came to join the beginner's class. My son will just watch quietly." The instructor didn't hide his smirk. "All right," he said, turning away. "You can stand at the back. Try to keep up," the class began. The billionaire watched from a corner as he usually did, arms crossed, his black belt tied perfectly around his waist. He liked to observe before joining in. It made others nervous, kept them on their toes. At first, everything went as usual. Students practiced footwork, balance, and simple throws. Some stumbled. Some laughed nervously. The father moved carefully, following the instructions with quiet focus. He didn't look at anyone else. He didn't try to show off. Every movement he made was smooth and calm, though his form seemed naturally precise. The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly. There was something about the way the man moved. Not flashy, not hesitant, just centered, balanced. It reminded him of the older masters he had trained with years ago, the ones who didn't need to prove anything. After a while, the instructor called for a short break. Students gathered near the water cooler, whispering and giggling. The single dad stayed back, helping his son adjust the straps of his small backpack. The little boy looked up at him, smiling shyly. "You did good, Dad," he said softly. The father smiled back and gently tapped his nose. "It's not about good or bad, kiddo. It's about learning to be calm." The billionaire overheard that and felt a strange irritation. Calmness was something he prided himself on. Yet hearing it said so simply by someone like this man stirred something inside him. He stepped forward, his footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. Everyone instantly fell silent. "You," he said, pointing toward the father. His voice was calm but heavy with authority. "You seem confident. Come." Every head turned toward the father. The little boy froze, holding onto his father's sleeve. The father looked at the billionaire for a moment, then nodded politely. He whispered something to his son, probably to stay back and watch, then slowly walked to the center of the mat. The room felt different now. The chatter was gone, replaced by quiet tension. Students moved to the edges, forming a wide circle. The billionaire removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. "I'll give you a simple test," he said, his tone still polite but clearly challenging. "Let's see if you can handle a basic spar." The father stood straight, his expression calm. He bowed respectfully, the traditional way. "With respect, sir," he said softly. "Aikido isn't about testing others. It's about learning balance and peace." A few students exchanged looks. No one ever spoke like that to the billionaire. The billionaire smiled, but there was a hint of annoyance behind it. "I know what Aikido is," he replied. "But it's also about real movement, real skill. Let's see yours." The father looked down for a second, then nodded again. "As you wish." They both took their positions. The air was still. The billionaire moved first, stepping forward with precision and speed. his hand aiming for the man's shoulder in a quick grab meant to pull him off balance. But in one graceful motion, the father turned slightly, letting the hand pass him, redirecting the force without even touching. The billionaire stumbled half a step before regaining his footing. Gasps spread through the room. The father's face didn't change. He simply stood still, breathing evenly. The billionaire smiled again, pretending it didn't surprise him. He moved faster this time, a fluid combination of strikes and holds meant to test the other's reactions. But once again, the father moved like water, not fighting, not blocking aggressively, just guiding the energy away. His movements were light but controlled, like he'd done this thousands of times before. After a few moments, the billionaire stopped. He stared at the man, his chest rising and falling slightly faster now. Around them, the room was completely quiet. Even the instructor who'd mocked the father earlier had his mouth open in disbelief. The father bowed again. "With respect, sir," he said quietly. "Strength isn't about overpowering. It's about harmony." The billionaire said nothing. For a few seconds, their eyes met, one filled with quiet wisdom, the other with a flicker of pride slowly turning to humility. Then the father stepped back, bowed once more, and walked toward his son. The little boy looked up at him, his face glowing with pride. "You were amazing, Dad," he whispered. The father smiled and ruffled his hair. "No, son. I just stayed calm." As they prepared to leave, a few of the students whispered among themselves. "Who is he?" one of them asked. "He moved like a master," another nodded. "And he didn't even look proud." The billionaire stood still in the middle of the mat, lost in thought. He had sparred with national champions, fighters, even professional athletes. But this man, this humble single father, had disarmed him without a single strike. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt before, respect without control. He turned to his senior instructor. "Find out who that man is," he said quietly. The instructor nodded quickly, bowing before hurrying off. Meanwhile, the father and his son were already outside, walking down the long path lined with bamboo trees. The boy ran ahead, pretending to practice the moves he'd just seen. The father smiled, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed and steady. The billionaire watched them through the window as they disappeared down the street. He couldn't stop thinking about the man's words. Aikido isn't about testing others. That night, as the dojo emptied, he stayed behind. He replayed the spar in his mind again and again. The way the man moved, the stillness in his eyes, the respect in his bow. For someone with nothing, no wealth, no fame, no position, to show such calm power was something the billionaire hadn't seen in a long time. Later, when the assistant brought him tea, he asked again, "Did you find out who he was?" "Not much," the assistant replied. "He's a single father. Works at a repair shop across town. Comes here after work sometimes, just watches from the back. This was his first time joining a class." The billionaire nodded slowly. "Interesting," he murmured. He looked around his empty dojo. For years, he'd filled it with mirrors and banners of success. Medals, photos of him with famous athletes, certificates from his travels. But tonight, for some reason, none of it felt meaningful. The image that stayed in his mind was the quiet strength of that man's movement and the calm smile of his little boy. Somewhere deep down, the billionaire knew that he had just met someone who understood Aikido better than he did. Not as a skill, but as a way of life. He stood in the middle of the mat once more and bowed. Alone and outside under the streetlights, a father and son walked home together, unaware that they had just changed the heart of a man who thought he had mastered everything. The next morning, the dojo buzzed with quiet whispers. Everyone was still talking about what had happened the day before. It wasn't every day that someone could step onto the mat with the billionaire master and leave him speechless. Students replayed the scene over and over, each adding their own version of the story. Some said the man moved like a ghost, untouchable. Others said he must have trained in secret for years. But what really stuck with people wasn't the way he moved. It was the way he stayed calm. He hadn't looked scared, proud, or angry. He looked peaceful, like he was somewhere else entirely. The billionaire arrived later than usual that day. When he walked in, the room immediately fell silent. The students bowed, their faces filled with curiosity. They wondered if he was angry about what had happened. But he looked calm, unusually calm. He began class as if nothing had happened. demonstrating moves and correcting students' forms. But every now and then his eyes drifted toward the entrance as if expecting the father and his little boy to appear again. They didn't. After class ended, he sat in the quiet dojo staring at the floor. His assistant approached carefully. "Sir, about that man yesterday, yes?" "I found out a little more," the assistant said. His name didn't come up in any local Aikido groups, but an older instructor from another city said he recognized him. Apparently, years ago he used to compete nationally. He was quite well known, but after a family tragedy, he disappeared from the scene. No one heard from him again until now. The billionaire leaned back, processing the words. "A family tragedy?" he asked softly. The assistant nodded. "Yes, his wife passed away some years ago. Since then, he's been raising his son alone. He doesn't talk about it much. Works long hours, lives quietly." For a moment, the billionaire didn't say anything. He simply looked out the window at the garden outside the dojo. The bamboo trees swayed gently in the wind, making soft rustling sounds. It reminded him of how the man had moved, quiet but steady. "Find his address," the billionaire said finally. "I want to speak with him." The assistant hesitated. "Are you sure, sir?" "Yes," the billionaire said. "I need to understand something." That evening, the single dad was at home, sitting at a small wooden table with his son. The house was tiny, barely 2 rooms, but it was warm and neat. The boy was finishing his homework while his father repaired a small toy helicopter, using a screwdriver and old parts from the workshop. "Dad, are we going back to the dojo?" the boy asked, looking up. The father smiled gently. "Maybe later. For now, let's just practice here." He placed the toy aside and stood up. He showed his son how to balance his stance and control his breathing. "Aikido starts here," he said, pointing to his chest. "Before your hands move, your heart must be calm." The boy nodded, trying to copy him. He stumbled a bit, then laughed. His father laughed softly too and helped him regain balance. Just then, there was a knock at the door. The father wiped his hands on a towel and opened it. Standing outside was the billionaire, dressed simply this time, no suit, no guards, just him. For a second, both men looked at each other without speaking. Then the father stepped aside politely. "Please come in." Inside, the billionaire glanced around the small home, the faded walls, the simple furniture, the warmth that came not from wealth, but from peace. The little boy offered him a seat and he smiled and sat down. "I wanted to thank you," the billionaire began. "For yesterday," the father shook his head. "No need to thank me. It was just practice." The billionaire studied his face. "You could have embarrassed me, but you didn't. Why?" The father smiled faintly. "Embarrassment only happens when someone tries to prove something." "I had nothing to prove." Those words sank deep. The billionaire had spent years proving things, his strength, his control, his wealth, his reputation. And yet this man with so little seemed more at peace than he had ever been. They talked for a while, about life, discipline, and Aikido. The billionaire asked how he had learned to move that way. The father explained that he had trained since he was a teenager, under a master who taught him that Aikido wasn't about fighting, but about understanding. "Every move," he said softly, "is a reflection of your state of mind. If your heart is at war, your body will be too. If your heart is calm, no one can move you." The billionaire listened silently. For the first time, he didn't feel like a master. He felt like a student. When he finally stood to leave, he bowed deeply, something he rarely did. "You've taught me more in one day than I've learned in years," he said sincerely. The father simply smiled. "We all learn from each other, sir. Some lessons just come quietly." As the billionaire walked out into the cool evening, he realized how much those quiet lessons had already started changing him. The next day, something unusual happened. The billionaire arrived early at the dojo, before anyone else. He sat on the mat, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The sun was still low and light filled the room softly. He wasn't thinking about competition or showing off. For the first time in years, he was just still. When the students arrived, they were surprised to see him already there, silent and calm. He began the class differently that day. Instead of showing powerful moves, he focused on breathing, balance, and connection. He told them, "Aikido begins when the heart is quiet." The students were stunned. The same man who once valued perfection and power was now speaking about peace and humility. They could tell something had shifted in him. After class, some gathered around him asking what had changed. He smiled slightly and said, Yesterday I met someone who reminded me what true mastery looks like. He didn't mention names, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Meanwhile, at the small repair shop, the single dad was busy fixing a customer's car. His hands moved quickly, wiping oil and tightening bolts. The little boy sat on a stool nearby, reading a comic book. A group of young men walked by, talking loudly. One of them pointed toward the shop. "Hey, isn't that the guy who sparred with the billionaire?" The others stopped and peered inside. "Yeah, that's him. Saw a clip online. Someone filmed it. He moved like a pro." The father heard them but didn't react. He just kept working quietly. The young men walked away, laughing and shaking their heads in disbelief. Later that day, an older man came into the shop. He looked familiar, one of the senior instructors from the dojo. He bowed politely and said, "Sir, the master asked if you'd consider coming back. He wants you to teach the advanced class next week." The father looked up surprised. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I'm not looking for attention. I only came to train with my son." The instructor smiled. "He said you might say that, but he insists you at least visit." The father hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll come by." When he arrived at the dojo that weekend, the atmosphere was different. There was no arrogance, no loud showing off. Everyone was practicing quietly, respectfully. The billionaire greeted him personally, bowing deeply again. "I've been rethinking everything," the billionaire admitted. "I used to think strength was about control, but you showed me that control comes from peace." The father smiled. "Peace is something you can't buy, sir. You earn it by letting go." The billionaire nodded. "Then I have a lot to learn." They trained together again, but this time it wasn't a challenge and it was an exchange. The billionaire slowed his movements, learning to flow instead of dominate. The father guided him gently, correcting small details, reminding him to breathe, to feel instead of force. At one point, the billionaire stopped and said quietly, "When I built this dojo, I wanted it to be the best. But maybe I built it for the wrong reason." The father replied, "Dojo means place of the way. Maybe you just needed to find your way back." The billionaire smiled, not the proud, practiced smile he used to wear for cameras, but a real one. As class ended, he invited the father and his son to stay for dinner. They shared a simple meal with the instructors and students. The boy laughed as some of the older students showed him how to stretch properly. The father watched quietly, grateful for the kindness. For the first time, the billionaire didn't feel like a master above everyone. He felt like part of something real. That night, after everyone left, he walked to the center of the dojo again. The silence felt different, warmer, deeper. He remembered the words that had stayed in his mind since that first day. "Aikido isn't about testing others." He whispered them softly to himself. Then he bowed, not to anyone in particular, but to the lesson he had finally understood. Outside, the city lights glowed softly, and somewhere across town, a father tucked his son into bed, proud not of what he had done, but of what his son was learning. That strength comes from calmness, and peace is the highest form of power. The following week, the dojo felt different again. The air carried a calm energy, the kind that comes when people stop trying to outshine one another. Students moved with more care, more focus. The billionaire master watched them quietly, noticing the change. He had begun each morning now not with strength drills or techniques, but with stillness. 10 minutes of silence before training began. When the father arrived with his little boy, everyone bowed respectfully. The billionaire stepped forward and greeted him warmly. "I've been thinking," he said. "You once said strength isn't about overpowering others. I didn't understand it fully before, but I'm beginning to." The father smiled gently. "Understanding takes time. It's good to see you practicing patience." The billionaire chuckled softly, something no one at the dojo had ever heard him do. "Patience," he repeated. "That's something I used to think was for weak people. But I see now it's harder than fighting." They began practice together, surrounded by students who watched closely. The father moved with effortless grace, guiding the billionaire's attacks into harmless motions, redirecting force rather than meeting it head-on. His calmness was almost hypnotic, every step perfectly timed, every breath in rhythm with the moment. After an hour, they stopped to rest. The little boy ran to his father carrying a bottle of water. "You did great, Dad," he said proudly. The billionaire smiled at the boy. "Your father makes it look easy." The father laughed softly. "That's because I stopped trying to make it hard. The billionaire tilted his head. What do you mean by that? The father thought for a moment, then said quietly, When I was younger, I wanted to prove I was strong. I pushed harder, trained longer, fought anyone who challenged me. But all that did was make me tired, inside and out. When I lost my wife, I realized none of that mattered. My son didn't need a fighter. He needed a calm father. The dojo fell quiet again. The students nearby stopped practicing to listen. There was something about the man's voice. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. Each word carried a truth that everyone could feel. The billionaire looked down at the floor. I understand, he said softly. I spent my life chasing perfection. I wanted everyone to see me as unshakable. But the truth is I was always afraid, and afraid of being seen as weak, afraid of losing. The father nodded slowly. That's the hardest battle, the one inside yourself. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, letting the silence say what words couldn't. Later that afternoon, after most students had left, the billionaire invited the father and his son into his office. The walls were lined with awards, photos of him with famous martial artists and newspaper clippings praising his achievements. But now he looked at them differently. These used to mean everything to me, he said, running his hand along one of the framed photos. But now they feel empty. Do you ever miss it? The competitions, the recognition? The father smiled faintly. Sometimes. But I learned something important. Recognition fades fast. Peace stays longer. The billionaire nodded slowly, taking in the words. He then turned to the boy. What do you want to be when you grow up? The boy looked shyly at his father, then back at the billionaire. I just want to be like my dad, he said. The billionaire smiled warmly. That's the best answer I've ever heard. He stood up and walked to his desk. I want to offer you something, he said to the father. I'd like you to join me here. Not as a student, but as a teacher. I'll pay you well. You can teach the advanced class. These students need someone like you. The father looked thoughtful. That's a kind offer, but I'm not sure I belong here. I found peace in a quiet life. My son and I have our rhythm. I don't want to lose that. The billionaire nodded in understanding. I respect that. But the door will always be open. The father bowed. Thank you. I'll think about it. As they left, the billionaire stood by the window, watching them walk away again, the father's hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. That simple gesture said more about strength than any trophy on his wall. Over the next few days, the billionaire couldn't stop thinking about the father's words. At night, he found himself sitting in the dojo long after everyone had gone home, reflecting on his life. He realized how much time he had spent chasing admiration, the applause after a demonstration, the cheers at tournaments, the headlines that called him the billionaire samurai. But now, all that noise seemed far away. What echoed louder was the quiet wisdom of the man who had shown him what true mastery looked like. Humility. He began to change little things. He started teaching beginners again himself, something he hadn't done in years. He took time to talk to students after class, asking about their lives, not just their skills. He began visiting small dojos across town, helping where he could without mentioning who he was. Slowly, word spread that the billionaire master was changing, but no one knew why. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the billionaire closed up the dojo and walked outside. The street was quiet. He noticed the father and his son sitting on a bench near the park, eating simple takeout dinner. He approached them with a smile. May I join you? The father nodded. Of course. They sat together, watching the boy laugh as pigeons gathered around for crumbs. The billionaire said softly, I envy you sometimes. You have something I never did, peace at home. The father looked at him with kind eyes. Peace isn't something that just appears. It's something you practice every day, like Aikido. You make small choices, patience instead of anger, gratitude instead of pride. The billionaire nodded. I've been trying. It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy, the father said with a smile. But it's worth it. The little boy ran back, holding a tiny paper boat he had made. Look, it floats, he said excitedly, placing it in a puddle nearby. The billionaire watched him for a long time. The child's laughter felt pure, untouched by the pressures of the world. For a moment, the billionaire wished he could start over, live with the same simplicity. He finally said, You know, when I first saw you, I thought you didn't belong in my dojo. The father smiled knowingly. And now? The billionaire sighed softly. Now I think I didn't belong in my own dojo. They both laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that comes from understanding something deep. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew. The billionaire often visited the small repair shop, bringing tea and sitting quietly while the father worked. Sometimes they talked about life, other times they said nothing at all. Silence between them never felt awkward, it felt peaceful. One afternoon, the billionaire asked, "When you teach your son, what do you tell him about strength?" The father paused, then said, "I tell him that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up quietly every time you do. I tell him that being strong means being kind, especially when it's hard." The billionaire nodded. "I wish someone had told me that when I was young." The father looked at him. It's never too late to learn. That evening, the billionaire went home and took down one of his largest trophies from the shelf. He placed it in a box and wrote on a piece of paper, "Real strength is calm." He set it beside the box as a reminder to himself. A few days later, a big charity event was held at the dojo. Many guests, reporters, and local officials attended. It was supposed to be a showcase of Aikido demonstrations and the billionaire's contributions to community programs. As the event began, the billionaire stood on stage, microphone in hand. He looked out at the large crowd, faces full of expectation. But instead of the usual grand speech, he simply said, "Before we begin, I want to invite someone who taught me what Aikido really means." He gestured toward the side of the stage. The father stepped forward quietly, dressed in a simple white uniform. The crowd murmured in surprise. "This man reminded me," the billionaire continued, "that Aikido is not about power or control. It's about harmony, compassion, and humility." He then bowed deeply to the father in front of everyone. The entire room fell silent. The father bowed back, his movements gentle and respectful. The billionaire straightened up and smiled. "Let's show them what balance looks like," he said. They sparred slowly, gracefully, every motion flowing like water, every exchange a dance of trust. It wasn't a battle. It was a lesson, for everyone watching, and for the billionaire himself. When they finished, the crowd erupted into quiet applause. Not loud or wild, but sincere afterward. Reporters asked the billionaire why he had bowed to someone else on his own stage. He simply said, "Because real masters never stop learning." That line spread everywhere, on news channels, online, and interviews. But the billionaire didn't care about the attention anymore. For the first time, the fame felt empty compared to the peace he felt inside. And as the father walked home that night with his son, the little boy looked up and said, "Dad, everyone clapped for you." The father smiled and shook his head. "They weren't clapping for me, son. They were clapping for what peace looks like." The boy didn't quite understand, but he nodded anyway, holding his father's hand tightly as they disappeared down the quiet street under the soft glow of the streetlights. The weeks that followed were quiet but full of small, meaningful moments. The billionaire continued to visit the father and his son, sometimes for a short lesson, other times just to sit quietly while the father worked in his small repair shop. It became a routine, but not one dictated by schedules or obligations. It was born out of respect, curiosity, and the unspoken understanding that each meeting brought something new for everyone involved. The son loved these visits most of all. He would run ahead to greet the billionaire, excited to show him the little games he had invented to practice balance or movement. Sometimes he would demonstrate a new technique he had learned from his father. The billionaire would watch carefully, nodding, giving subtle guidance. It amazed him how much the boy had absorbed from his father's teachings. He was already learning lessons that took many adults a lifetime to understand. One evening, the father suggested they take a walk in the park near their neighborhood. The air was crisp and the streets were quiet. The son skipped ahead, picking up fallen leaves and tossing them gently in the air. The billionaire followed closely, his hands clasped behind his back, observing everything in silence. "I never thought I would feel like this," the billionaire said quietly, breaking the calm. "After all these years, I never thought I would find someone who teaches me so much outside of a dojo." The father looked at him and smiled. "You've always had the skill," he said. "What you've been missing is patience and humility. Those don't come from practice alone." The billionaire shook his head. "It's more than that. Watching you with your son, seeing your calmness, your focus on life rather than fame or strength. It's something I've never experienced. I don't think anyone has ever done that for me before. The father looked down for a moment, thoughtful. It's not about doing something for someone. It's about living in a way that reflects your values. If you can see it, you can learn it. That's all. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in the air thoughts. The billionaire noticed how much of his own life had been spent in the wrong kind of competition, trying to prove himself to the world instead of focusing on the small, important things. He had trophies, headlines, and admiration, but what he lacked was simple: presence, patience, and peace. As they returned home, the father's son asked, "Can we practice tonight, Dad?" "Of course," the father replied, "but let's do it quietly without showing off." The billionaire stayed to watch, sitting cross-legged in a corner. The father and son moved together, practicing the gentle, flowing motions of Aikido. Every step was deliberate, every movement purposeful. But it wasn't about impressing anyone. The billionaire could feel the difference immediately. This was mastery without display, strength without ego. Later that night, the billionaire returned to his own home. His office was filled with the usual reminders of his achievements, but tonight they felt different. He walked slowly among the awards and pictures, seeing them not as symbols of power, but as markers of past effort. They were reminders of what he had accomplished, yes, but they didn't define who he was. He sat down and thought about the father and his son. Their life was simple, humble, and filled with small joys. They didn't chase recognition. They didn't crave admiration. Yet in a way, their life held a power he had never experienced, the kind that came from quiet consistency, love, and calm focus. The next day at the dojo, something unexpected happened. The father had agreed to attend, not to teach, but to demonstrate some basic techniques to help new students understand the flow of movements. When he stepped onto the mat, the atmosphere shifted. The students watched him carefully, remembering the calm grace he had displayed weeks ago. The billionaire observed from the side, his usual air of dominance replaced by curiosity and respect. He had begun to notice subtle changes in his students as well. They were less focused on competing with each other, more focused on learning. The father's presence had a ripple effect, not through force or words, but simply through example. During the demonstration, the father moved slowly, deliberately, and with complete awareness. Each throw, each redirect was precise but gentle. The students began to mimic him, and the difference was immediate. Movements that had seemed awkward or forced before now flowed naturally. The billionaire felt a strange pride, not his own, but in witnessing the quiet mastery of someone who had chosen to live simply. It reminded him that teaching wasn't about control or status. It was about sharing understanding. After the session, he called the father aside. "I've been thinking," he said. "You could help change a lot of lives here if you wanted to. Not just the students, but everyone who comes through these doors. You have something I never learned from books, trophies, or teachers." The father looked at him, calm but firm. "I don't want to change the world with a dojo," he said softly. "I only want to live my life the way I know is right and help my son grow with the same values." "That's enough for me," the billionaire nodded. He could not argue. He understood that power was not about the number of people you could influence. It was about the quality of life you led. A few days later, the billionaire invited the father to attend a private seminar with several high-level martial artists. Usually these events were exclusive, filled with wealthy, competitive fighters all looking to test their skills and gain recognition. But this time the billionaire wanted the father there, not as a competitor but as an observer and quiet teacher. During the seminar, the father moved among the participants, offering small corrections and guidance when asked. He didn't boast. He didn't show off. He simply demonstrated calm control and focus. The other martial artists were stunned. Many of them had spent years trying to perfect their technique. Yet here was someone who did it without effort, without pride. The billionaire watched with a mix of admiration and humility. He realized that true mastery was not about dominating others as he had once believed. It was about understanding, awareness, and patience. Watching the father interact with the participants, he understood that strength without compassion was empty. Back at the father's home that evening, the little boy asked, "Dad, why is he so different now?" "The billionaire?" The father smiled, brushing a stray hair from the boy's forehead. Because he's learning, he said simply. He's realizing that strength isn't about power. It's about how you treat others and how calm you can stay in any situation. The boy nodded thoughtfully. I want to be like that too. You already are, his father said softly. It's a journey, but you're learning every day. The boy smiled, satisfied for now. Weeks turned into months, and the father's presence at the dojo became more natural. He wasn't there to compete or seek recognition, but his influence was undeniable. Students began to approach him for guidance, and even the billionaire found himself seeking advice on small things, from meditation to managing emotions during sparring. One afternoon, after a particularly long session, the billionaire and the father sat on the edge of the mat, catching their breath. The dojo was quiet, empty except for them. I never thought I'd learn this much outside of my own training, the billionaire said quietly. You've taught me things no teacher or experience ever did. The father shook his head. I didn't teach you anything directly. You learned it yourself. You just needed to see it differently. The billionaire smiled faintly. I see it now. Life isn't about proving how strong you are. It's about how steady you can be when life challenges you, and how much you care along the way. The father nodded. Exactly. That's the lesson that matters. The billionaire started making small changes in his own life. He reduced unnecessary meetings, spent more time in quiet reflection, and even helped at community programs without seeking attention. He found that the more he practiced humility, the more fulfilled he felt. One evening, as the father and his son prepared dinner, the billionaire arrived with a small bouquet of flowers. For your son, he said, handing them over. Not because I want anything, but because I wanted to show appreciation for all you've taught me. The little boy grinned, taking the flowers carefully. Thank you, sir. The father smiled warmly. You didn't have to, but thank you. The billionaire nodded. Some lessons can't be bought, and some gratitude can't be spoken. I hope this is one of them. They shared a simple meal together, laughing softly at small stories, enjoying the quiet presence of each other. It was not grand or extravagant, but it felt like something richer than anything the billionaire had experienced in years. That night, the billionaire returned to his own home. He looked around at his trophies and pictures again, but this time they felt different. They were reminders of effort, not ego, and in a quiet corner of his mind, he carried the lesson he had learned from the father and his son, that real power isn't in dominating others, showing off, or winning competitions. It's in calmness, patience, and integrity, in living your life in a way that inspires quietly, without demands or recognition. He sat quietly for a long time, reflecting on everything he had learned. Somewhere across the city, a father tucked his son into bed, proud not of his skills, not of his past, but of the life he had built and the lessons he had passed along. And in that quiet, unremarkable moment, both men, different in wealth and experience but united by understanding, shared the same truth, that strength without calm, mastery without humility, and skill without compassion are empty. True power comes quietly, steadily, and without need for applause. Months had passed since the father first stepped onto the dojo mat, yet the memory of that day lingered with everyone who had witnessed it. The billionaire master had changed in ways that could not be measured by trophies, medals, or headlines. His students noticed it immediately, the way he moved now, slower, more deliberate, but no less skilled. He had traded force for awareness and ego for patience. The father and his son continued their quiet routine, walking to the dojo whenever they had time, practicing small movements together, and sharing moments of laughter along the way. The billionaire often walked beside them, not as a master or an authority figure, but as someone learning from their example. One morning, the billionaire suggested they try something new. Let's go outside the dojo, he said. I want to see how calmness works in the world beyond these walls. The father raised an eyebrow but smiled. Lead the way, he said. They walked through the quiet streets toward a small park. The son ran ahead, chasing a stray ball, while the father and the billionaire followed. People in the park looked at the billionaire curiously, recognizing him instantly, but he didn't mind. He walked calmly, letting the world observe him without needing to prove anything. Once they reached a clearing, the billionaire asked the father to demonstrate a few movements. The father stepped lightly onto the grass, his posture relaxed but precise. He moved slowly, turning and shifting weight effortlessly. The billionaire tried to follow, but each movement reminded him that he was still learning. That mastery wasn't about speed, but about flow and understanding. A few people nearby stopped to watch. Some whispered, recognizing the billionaire, but no one expected the calm, almost meditative scene unfolding before them. It was not a performance. It was a lesson. The father guided him through a few exercises, correcting posture, reminding him to breathe and encouraging him to sense the energy around him rather than force it. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt a peace he could not buy. He had fought countless battles, faced thousands of opponents, and yet, he had never experienced strength like this, a quiet, steady and compassionate. After practice, they sat on a bench, the sun between them, eating a small snack. The billionaire turned to the father. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You've given me more than I could have imagined. Not just skill, but understanding, perspective, life lessons." The father shook his head. "No thanks are needed. I didn't teach you anything. You found it yourself. I only showed the way quietly." The billionaire looked at him thoughtfully. "I've spent my life seeking recognition, chasing approval, and trying to prove myself. Now I see how empty that was. You've shown me what really matters." The father smiled. "Then the lesson has done its work." The son looked up at both of them. "I want to learn too," he said, eyes shining. "You already are," his father said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Every day you learn by watching, by practicing, by living." The billionaire smiled, realizing that this simple family, a father and son, had given him something no trophy or headline ever could: clarity. The story of that quiet demonstration in the park soon spread. A student who had recorded a small clip shared it online. It didn't go viral because of flashy moves or dramatic fights, but because of the calmness and respect that filled every motion. People were fascinated by the billionaire's humility and the father's quiet mastery. Comments poured in, not just about skill, but about the lesson of life it represented. Yet the father never sought attention. He didn't appear in interviews or post videos himself. To him, mastery was private, something to live rather than display. The billionaire, too, avoided using the moment for publicity. He understood now that recognition was fleeting. The real reward lay in learning and living differently. At the dojo, the effect was remarkable. Students who once competed against each other fiercely began practicing together more patiently. They learned to support rather than prove, to guide rather than dominate. The father's influence, gentle and steady, had reshaped the culture of the dojo without a single harsh word. The billionaire began to teach differently too. He emphasized mindfulness, balance, and awareness over force. He shared stories of his own mistakes, his impatience, and his need to control, showing the students that even masters were still learning. The room felt lighter, more open, more alive. One evening, the billionaire invited the father and his son to a quiet tea ceremony at the dojo. He had prepared the room himself, arranging the tatami mats, brewing the tea, and lighting candles. The son's eyes widened, impressed by the care in such a simple setup. "This is how we honor life," the billionaire said softly. "Small gestures, focused attention, and respect for every moment. Not for show, but for understanding." The father nodded. "Every action has meaning, even the quiet ones." They drank tea together in silence at first, each appreciating the stillness. The billionaire looked at the boy and said, "You're very lucky to have a father who teaches so much with such patience." The son smiled shyly. "I know," the billionaire continued. "I wish I had learned this as a child. I spent too much time trying to prove myself, not learning how to live." The father placed a hand on the billionaire's shoulder. "It's never too late to start." That simple statement carried more weight than any words the billionaire had ever heard in speeches or read in books. As the months went on, the father's lessons began to influence more than just the students at the dojo. The billionaire began reaching out quietly, supporting local communities, encouraging humility, and modeling patience and calm in business decisions. His employees noticed the change, his partners noticed it, and even the students in the dojo noticed it. A ripple effect began, subtle but real. One afternoon, the father received a call from an older martial artist who had once trained with him before his life had changed. "I saw the videos," the man said. "You've changed a lot of lives without trying. Even the billionaire seems different now." He listens, he reflects. "It's incredible." The father smiled softly. "It's not about me." He had to see it himself. Yes, but your presence guided him, the older man replied. You have a gift. I suppose, the father said quietly. But my gift is my life, not recognition. I teach my son the way I know is right, and that's enough. One evening, after another quiet session at the dojo, the billionaire walked with the father and his son toward the exit. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The boy skipped ahead, his laughter echoing. Do you ever think about the first day you stepped onto this mat? The billionaire asked. The father nodded. I do. It feels like a long time ago, though the lesson hasn't ended yet. The billionaire laughed softly. It changed me in ways I never expected. I don't think I'll ever forget it. It changed all of us, the father said, glancing at the students cleaning up inside the dojo. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest impact. The billionaire paused, reflecting. Yes, that's true. As they reached the street, the little boy tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, can we come back tomorrow? The father smiled. Of course, we will. The billionaire watched them walk away, their figures framed by the warm glow of the streetlights. For a long time he stood there silently, feeling the depth of the lesson he had learned. That life's true strength is measured not in trophies or wealth, but in calmness, humility, and the quiet way one lives and teaches others. He understood now that mastery was not about defeating others. It was about understanding yourself and showing compassion to everyone around you. And sometimes the greatest teachers are those who appear ordinary. A single father, a small boy, and a life lived with integrity. That night, the billionaire returned to his home and placed a simple note on his desk. Strength without compassion is empty. Mastery without humility is meaningless. Peace is the highest form of power. He sat quietly, reflecting on the journey, feeling gratitude he could not have imagined months before. Somewhere across the city, a father tucked his son into bed, proud not of titles, not of achievements, but of the calm, steady life he had built. And in that quiet moment, the lessons of the dojo, the park, and life itself came together, a reminder that true power is invisible to the eyes, but felt deeply in the heart. The father continued his life simply, walking his son to school, practicing Aikido in the park, and living with quiet joy. The billionaire, forever changed, continued to teach, work, and live with new understanding. Their lives intertwined not because of wealth, fame, or competition, but because of respect, humility, and the unspoken wisdom that real strength comes quietly, patiently, and without need for applause. And that lesson, carried forward through small actions and gentle guidance, reached everyone who witnessed it, a legacy not of titles or fortune, but of calm, steady, and human mastery.